Chapter 4. Brynn stood in front of a mirror, which hung off the door in her shared room. Her eyes raked over ashen elbows. They crossed over her chest where the pleated fabric ran around her torso and pulsed out in rivulets. It was the only dress she owned. Sleek, silky, and her favorite muted aquamarine color. But it fell over her in odd curves and bulges she couldn't miss, obstructing the smooth lines of the material. She blew out a sigh, and it sent one coiled lock of her hair flying around her head. Why am I even doing this? Eyes wandering back to the mirror, her thoughts flung her back to the dressing room where she'd first tried on the dress. It had been a cold October day in her senior year, her stepmom and siblings wandering around the mall. She'd slipped away when that aquamarine color caught her eye. Legs and arms moving of their own accord, she'd pulled the dress from the sales rack and found her way into the dressing room of the small outlet store. At the time, as she'd stared at the material draping over her figure, she'd felt like a princess. Before realizing what she was doing, she was at the register and purchasing it. Refusing the offered bag, she stuffed it in her backpack and meandered back to her family. Since then, the dress had never seen the outside. There'd never been a chance. Now, as she assessed herself in the mirror, she felt less like a princess and more like a troll. Pulling the dress over her head, she hung it carefully back in the closet and grabbed one of her favorite sweaters. She paired it over thick leggings and breathed out the remaining tension with a sigh. Hearing the doorknob twist, she watched the door click open. "Hey," Marietta said, wasting little time to start unloading her things on her side of the room. "You missed game night on Saturday." Brynn shifted, turning away to pull out her own bag and books. "Right. Sorry," she said, her voice barely carrying. She cleared her throat. "I was at the bar." Brynn kept her gaze laser-focused on adding the necessary books and the bar's work uniform to her bag. But she heard the huff behind her. "I know how much you need the money," Marietta said. "But you work too much. You're going to get sick." Two warm tendrils infiltrated Brynn's chest, and she fought against it. "You're such a mom, Etta," she said, turning around with a smile she wove through her lips. Marietta sighed, shaking her head, but she beamed back. Brynn glanced away. "You working again tonight?" Marietta said, nodding to the uniform peeking out of her bag. "Yeah," Brynn said. "I'll be back late." "You're going out now?" Marietta asked, eyes dropping to the watch around her wrist. "Doesn't your next class start at like 3? "Yeah," Brynn said, straightening everything in her bag. "I'm going to get some lunch." "Oh," Marietta said. "That's great. Are you going with anyone?" Avoiding eye contact, Brynn lifted the corners of her lips, but it stretched her skin awkwardly. "Yeah," she said, pulling the strap over her shoulder. Brynn choked as she tried to label whatever Finn was to her. Marietta pressed, and those words halted Brynn at the doorway. Her thoughts spun in place. Even as Brynn faced the exit, she felt the prickling sensation of Marietta's gaze on her back, while she pretended to fiddle with the stuff in her bag. A person from my calm class, she settled on. When Marietta didn't immediately respond, Brynn pushed forward. Well, I gotta go, she said, her words tumbling out too quickly. See you. Have fun, Marietta called back. And Brynn swore she heard a stifled giggle over the sound of the front door creaking closed behind her.
Finn. Beside the turnstiles leading to the buffet and seating area, Finn sat at a cushioned bench just inside the dining hall, chugging the last of the sports drink he bought on his way there. A sharp pain shot between his eyes. Closing them, Finn's head pulsed like a bruise with every clang coming from the lunchtime cacophony. I shouldn't have drunk so much. The previous night was a blur, from studying to shots and drinking games, but at least he remembered it all this time, even crashing on the floor with everyone else. Rubbing his eyes until he saw stars behind his lids, Finn's thoughts were bleeding crimson. All that red in his head was taking on a shape now, curly, flaming strands against a twilit horizon reflecting off the sea. Finn? The voice was barely loud enough to carry over all of the noise, but it softened the competing hammers in his head. His eyes flew open to it. Standing in front of him, Brynn was slightly hunched over, her gaze practically screaming question marks at him. Overcast light shined in from the window walls. The glow backlit her like an angel out of place. He almost laughed at the sight, one corner of his mouth quirking up. "Hey," he said in no rush to stand. Instead, he straightened. "Are you okay?" she asked, her brows scrunching together. "You look like hell." A chuckle slipped out of him. She looked aghast, and forcing down the fresh laughter sent pangs through his skull. "Are you going through some kind of mental breakdown?" she asked. "That's what I said," he shot back, grunting with the effort to stand. That day, the scent of just out of the oven chicken wafted from the dining area, filling his mouth with saliva and the promise of burying his headache in a grave. That day, head whipping back, which sent pangs of last night's mistake through his skull, his gaze landed on Brynn's confused expression. "At the beach," he said, inching backwards for the turnstiles. "I asked if you were okay. You just said the same thing." Her face smoothed, but her eyes went wide as she stared back at him. "Right. You want to go in now?" he said. "I don't know about you, but I'm starving, and I skipped breakfast." She cracked a small smile. "Me too." "It's buffet style," he said, using his phone to swipe them both in. "So, want to go grab what you want and then find a table?" "Sure," she said, and she took a step toward the smoothie bar. "Hold up." He set a hand on her shoulder to stop her, but when his fingers met the fabric of her sweater, she flinched. He jerked his hand back. You don't have socials, but what about a phone number? We'll need a way to find each other." Arms barred across her chest, she peeked up at him like a wary, stray cat. "Right," she said, but her voice was small. "That makes sense." He offered her his phone. "Thanks," she said, taking it from him. As she swiped and clicked on buttons, she swallowed hard, her chin jutting out with the effort. "You only talk to Arden and Avery, and now that girl, too." Those words punctured him as he watched Brynn use his phone, but he pushed them back once she pressed the home button and glanced at him. "Here," she said, handing it back. "I texted myself." "Cool," he said, turning away to hide the grin climbing out.
Brynn. Brynn had been looking forward to the free food. After brushing Marietta's parting laugh from her head, Brynn's thoughts turned to the types of food she could never make on her own. Smoothies with produce she could never afford. Burgers made like a restaurant's. Fried rice. Tacos. The choices were endless. But as she waited in line for a smoothie, that moment Finn's hand touched her shoulder, replayed like a scratched disc in her head. She still felt the weight of his fingers there, like a hot iron brand. But the sting of it came from memories she'd rather forget. Like her stepmom's hands curling around her shoulders in a vice grip over the last 12 years. Miss. The word broke through the fog, swallowing her up. The student worker stared at her. Miss, do you know what you want? Oh, she said, her gaze darting for the menu. Sorry, yeah, I'll have the mango tango. It was the first menu item she saw. Waiting for the smoothie, she focused on clearing her head, counting down from 100, scanning her body. Anything. Once the smoothie was in her hand, she wandered around the other food stations. After filling a plate with several different kinds of dishes, she felt a buzz in her pocket. Setting the plate down on a corner of an empty table, she pulled out her phone. A message notification lit up her lock screen. Far corner across from the Louisiana kitchen place. She glanced in that direction, and her gaze found him in an instant. Piling chicken tenders into his mouth with bites that were too ambitious, his eyes danced around the hall, searching. A giggle escaped her. Surprised by the sound, she covered her mouth with the back of her hand, fingers still gripped around her phone. Somehow, that movement drew his gaze. Grinning with his cheeks as full as a winter prepping chipmunk, he waved to her. Her lips curved under her knuckles. She glanced at her plate. It wasn't full yet, but she picked it up and crossed the dining area to his chosen table anyway. Hey, he said around a mouthful. What'd you get? She put her plate and smoothie on the table. Nice choices, he said, as she dropped her bag one seat over and sat down across from him. She eyed the sports drink by his plate, and that sparked the image of him with his eyes closed when she'd walked into the dining hall. Hungover? She mumbled with the realization. He stopped chewing, his eyes peeling back, but he stared right at her. Guilty, he said with a smirk. On a Wednesday at 1 p.m.? That sounds like a judgment, he said, finally swallowing his massive bite. Her cheeks burned, and she dropped her gaze to the smoothie. Picking it up, she pressed the cup to her lips, holding it there. No, she said. When he didn't answer, she glanced at him. With one brow cocked and a lopsided smile, his cheeks still filled like a squirrel's, she laughed. Okay, maybe, she said. I just can't imagine it. What? Getting drunk during the school week, she said. So then, he said, a bright note in his voice. When do you get drunk? The twisted tea can from her sibling's birthday party popped into her head. Just on some weekends or breaks, I guess, she said, before taking a long sip of her drink. She barely tasted it. That look right now, Finn said. All traces of levity vanished. That was the same look you had then. Her eyes jumped to him, and his bored into her like a drill. Her fingers twitching, she wanted to move, but his gaze held her like a prison guard. Does that mean you're thinking about your parents? He asked. Her arms, her legs, every muscle in her body tightened at the question. But her thoughts were a storm, remembering that night at the bar. So, you were listening? Yeah, she said. I guess I only drink when I see them. When I see my parents is the only time I can't drink, Finn said, his eyes finally freeing her as they dropped to his plate. Why is that? She asked. I don't know, he said, staring at his food like it held answers. I can't mess up around them, I guess. The words fell from his lips like an obituary. That makes sense, she said, measuring each word. The weight of his gaze fell on her again. It does? He asked. Images assaulted her. Of her stepmom speaking in double-twisted words, of her father drifting like a ghost through her teenage years, of her own face reflected in mirrors around her childhood home. She sucked in a sharp breath. Yeah, she said, but it came out as little more than a whisper. I think it does. That day at the ocean, Finn started. Can I ask? Her thoughts threw her back to those ocean steps, to his open and clear eyes when I know I'm just some guy, but I'll hear you out if you want. Now, his gaze beseeched her. About what happened? Yeah, he said. Why do you want to know? Their eyes locked, the dining hall din filling the silence between them. Because, he said, my parents suck too. Her mouth twitched, curving of its own accord, but no urge to hide it possessed her hands or turned her face away. Okay, she said. As she recounted that day, she found herself explaining things she'd never put in words before. The reasons she braved going back to that ghostly house. A defense of her love for Riley and Quinn, the only parts left alive in that place. The exhausting toll it all took to travel, to be present, to recover. It just fell out of her. And Finn just listened. His attention wrapped even in the pauses they took to eat. So, whenever I have to deal with them, she finished, I always go to that spot, and that's where you found me. He mumbled. Fate. What? I must have misheard. Same, he said. I'm the same. I definitely misheard. What do you mean? I understand, I guess, he said. I recognized that look, the one you had that day. How? She asked. Brows verging over the bridge of his nose. He looked confused. I mean, I told you how I got there, she said. But what about you? Excuse me. Brynn's eyes flew to a young student worker. She must have been a freshman or a sophomore. We're closing the dining hall now to prepare for dinner, she said, almost trembling. I have to ask you to leave. I'm sorry. Brynn pulled out her phone. 3:35? She totally missed her class. Even if she ran now, she'd only make the last 5 minutes. Her gaze shot around the hall. The workers were cleaning. Everyone was gone. Oh my God, she said, turning back to the girl. I'm so sorry. No problem, she said with a relieved look. I can take your plates. As Brynn's chest crackled with embarrassment, she picked up her bag, pulling the strap over her head. Hey, Finn said over the clatter of movement echoing around the hall. Cool air breezed over her arm. Gaze drawn to that spot, she found Finn's hand hovering above her wrist. Sorry, he said, pulling it back. Do you have anything now? No, she said, as she tucked runaway curls behind her ear. I actually missed my afternoon class. This time, the burn in her cheeks spread to her nose. She looked down at her bag. I have work at 6, but... Nothing till then? He asked. Hearing the smile in his voice, she nodded. Then we could walk around campus until then. The statement hung like a question. But what about you? The void left beneath her ribs throbbed after expelling so many festering wounds. I want to know. Yeah, she said.
Finn. Finn walked the university's paved path that circled the main campus's buildings. When he'd walked this route in his large group, he never noticed the icy air before. With Brynn keeping pace beside him, his left side hummed with summer heat even while his other side stung with the late autumn chill. His eyes slid down to her. How tall is she? One of them or both of them were always sitting. Next to his nearly 6-foot height, she was tiny. The image of a mastiff walking beside a kitten flew through his head. A chuckle slipped out, her head whipped to him. What? She asked, and she looked skittish, just like a cat. He pressed down on his lips to keep from erupting in laughter. Nothing, he finally said, when he could trust opening his mouth. She eyed him warily, so he flashed her a smile. She started, glancing away. I asked you earlier about how you got to that spot at the ocean. An itch prickled the back of his neck. I was at a party the night before, he said, scratching at the base of his skull. I was hungover, carless, and walking home. That's not what I meant, she said. I know. His gaze drifted to the swirling clouds. A sigh reached his ear. Head tipping back down, he caught her drop her head and look away. Still, he could just see the green in her eyes. They're so bright. But as she stared at the ground, she looked far away too. Mirrored versions of his own childhood face struck his thoughts. Old photos, he said. In his periphery, he saw Brynn's head turn, her gaze his again. Old photos, she asked. You said something about that at the bar. Yeah, he said. Sometimes I'd look through old photos when I was in high school, of vacations and shit my parents took me and my sister on. He swallowed, but claws were scratching at his throat. What did you see in those photos? Brynn's red curls bounced around her shoulders as they walked. Under the pale dusk light, her hair shone like smoldering embers, like a flame. His hand lifted, reaching. Finn? Her eyes searched his. For the first time, they peered back at him, unguarded. Yeah, he said, confining his hand to his jacket pocket. My parents always had strangers take a group shot of us wherever we went. We were all smiling, but not our eyes. With a slight parting of her lips, Brynn sucked in a breath. What? Finn asked. She shook her head, those curls flying around her. Nothing, she said. I know what you mean. Finn's gaze shot away. Really? Yeah, Brynn said. Can I? Her change in tone whipped his head back around, teeth pressing so hard into her bottom lip he could see where the flesh stretched white. What? He asked. Her jaw clenched. Can I ask what it was like with them? Needles pricked at his thoughts, forcing his eyes closed. You mean my parents? Wind whistled through the air long enough that he glanced back down at her. Her shoulders hunched, arms crossed over her stomach. He blanched. What is that posture? Just forget I asked, she said, slowing her pace. Maybe I should just No. You can ask, he said, and she turned back to him. I just don't have much to tell. What do you mean? She asked. His blood burned, spreading out from his face all the way to his toes. My parents weren't around much, he said, the image of the empty, dark halls and rooms of his childhood home filling his head. I only really saw them on those vacations. The dark fog returned, and he shook away the ant-itching feeling it left behind. For a while, my sister and I had a nanny, he said, almost laughing at the way he could barely remember what she looked like. But when my sister turned 15 and I was 12, she became my babysitter. And then when she went to college, it was just me. Brynn's eyes peered at him like they were sharing a secret. Yeah, she said, I get that. Yeah. She didn't look away. He didn't look away. The green in her eyes reflected the ocean back at him. Finn, she said, and her face was closer than he remembered it being just a moment before. Feeling the strain in his back, he straightened. Yeah, he asked. What is this? What? I mean, why did you invite me to lunch? She continued. What? But her jaw hung open. What are we? What am I to you? Do you even care about me? The questions posed by she's, he's, and thems he'd spent nights with flitted through his head. We're friends, he said with a relief of cream to a burn. Friends? She asked, her brows converging. Yeah, he said, and his lips lifted at the corners. She stared at him, framed in a stillness that brought to mind the living artwork his parents took him to once. But one twitch of her mouth shattered the illusion, and then she smiled. Yeah,